Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're cracking open the case file on a war that, well, it feels kind of forgotten sometimes, doesn't it? But it was absolutely pivotal. We're talking about the Crimean-War, 1853 to 1856, a really brutal clash that fundamentally reshaped Europe.
It really did. It's often overshadowed by, other big 19th century conflicts, but its impact was enormous.
And when you dig into it, it's way more than just the famous bits like Florence Nightingale or the Charge of the Light Brigade, right?
Oh, absolutely. You've got 5 major powers entangled: Russia, the Ottoman Empire, France, Great Britain, and even Sardinia-Piedmont sort of jumping in.
It became this horrific testing ground for new technologies, but also just plagued by terrible mismanagement, disease, industrialized killing on a scale not really seen before in that way.
Exactly. And our mission today is to really unpack that, to dive into the sources and untangle this knot of geopolitical fear, religious squabbles that dragged everyone into this incredibly destructive war. We want to approach it like the historical thriller it really was.
Yeah, thriller feels right. High stakes, lots of intrigue.
And fear is the word you used earlier, and I think that's absolutely central to understanding it all. You look at the sources, and it wasn't just simple aggression driving this.
No.
Not really. It was more like a chain reaction of mutual anxiety, maybe even paranoia. The big prize, or maybe the big problem everyone was focused on, was the Ottoman Empire.
Ah, the famous sick man of Europe.
Precisely. It was visibly weakening, collapsing, really. And Russia, under Tsar Nicholas I, saw an opportunity. They were pushing south, always pushing south, looking for those warm water ports.
Ports that would give their navy access to the Mediterranean all year round.
Exactly. A game changer for Russian trade and power projection.
Okay, so that's the Russian ambition, driven partly by opportunity, partly by strategy. What was the counter fear then from Britain and France?
Absolute terror, frankly. They were convinced that if the Ottoman Empire collapsed completely, Russia would just step in, fill the vacuum.
Upsetting the whole balance of power?
Completely. Threatening vital trade routes, especially Britain's route to India, and potentially dominating the whole Eastern Mediterranean. It became less about propping up the Ottomans eventually, and much more about stopping Russia, containing them.
So everyone's watching this declining empire, terrified about who gets the spoils or who gets disadvantaged when it finally goes under.
It created this incredibly tense atmosphere where every move, every diplomatic incident was seen in the worst possible light. A tinderbox, really.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. A tiny spark in that kind of environment. Well, it could ignite anything. Let's get into part 1. The fuse is lit prehistory and the sudden descent into war.
Right. So first, you have to grasp the underlying problem, the big structural issue. Historians call it the Eastern question. Basically, how to handle the slow, unavoidable decline of Ottoman power.
It had been going on for a while by the 1850s, hasn't it?
Oh, decades. The early 19th century was just one setback after another for the Ottomans. You had Serbian autonomy kicking off way back in 1804. Then Greece won its independence in 1830.
And wasn't there a major naval disaster around then, too?
Yes, the Battle of Navarino in 1827. A combined British, French, and Russian fleet, ironically, working together then, just annihilated the Ottoman Navy. It showed everyone how weak they were at sea.
And they were trying to modernize their army, too, which actually backfired in the short term.
That's a crucial point. The Sultan disbanded the old elite Janissary Corps in 1826. It was a necessary step towards building a modern European-style army, but
it left them incredibly weak right when they needed strength.
Exactly. Terrible timing. They basically dismantled their military backbone before the new structure was ready, and this weakness was exploited almost immediately.
Not by Russia or Britain, though.
No, incredibly, by their own vassal, Muhammad Ali of Egypt, a very powerful, ambitious figure. In 1831 and then again in 1838, his Egyptian forces completely routed the Sultan's armies.
Wow. So Egypt almost took over the Ottoman Empire.
They marched close to Constantinople. It caused absolute panic. The Sultan was forced to do the unthinkable: ask Russia, his traditional enemy, for military help just to survive.
That must have been a bitter pill to swallow.
Hugely. But Tsar Nicholas I was, more than happy to step in. This led to the Treaty of Huncar-Exclissi in 1833.
Okay, what did that treaty do?
It was pretty revolutionary, actually. It basically set up a military alliance between Russia and the Ottomans. But the really critical part, the clause that terrified London and Paris, was about the Straits, the Bosphorus and Dardanelles.
The gateway to the Black Sea and the Mediterranean.
Precisely. The treaty said the Sultan had to close the straits to all foreign warships if Russia requested it, essentially if Russia felt threatened.
Whoa. So that gave Russia potential control over access to the Black Sea.
Yes, it was a massive strategic coup for Russia. Britain and France were absolutely apoplectic. They saw it as Russia locking the back door to Europe.
So how did they undo that? Because obviously that situation didn't last until the Crimean War.
Through intense diplomatic pressure, non-stop pressure really, it culminated in the London Straits Convention of 1841. This new treaty essentially internationalized the Straits. It said they were closed to all warships during peacetime, stripping Russia of its special privilege. Crucially, though, it also allowed the Sultan to let Allied warships in during wartime.
Ah, so that flipped the advantage later on.
It set the stage, yes. And around the same time, Britain secured massive trade advantages with the Ottomans through the Treaty of Baltic-Laman in 1838.
So preserving the Ottoman Empire became vital for British trade too, not just about stopping Russia.
Absolutely. By the 1840s, keeping the Ottoman Empire intact, even if weak, served two key British interests: blocking Russian expansion towards the Mediterranean and India, and protecting their lucrative trade access.
Okay, so the big picture is set. Strategic fears, commercial interest, a declining empire. But the actual spark, the thing that finally lit the fuse, it was something almost absurdly small, wasn't it?
It really was. It sounds incredible now, but the immediate trigger was a dispute between France and Russia over Christian holy sites in Palestine.
Like, who gets the keys to the church?
Pretty much, specifically places like the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. It was about whether Catholic monks championed by France or Orthodox monks championed by Russia had precedence, had the right to manage certain areas, repair things.
It sounds like a playground squabble almost.
But it was all about prestige, national prestige, especially for France under Napoleon III.
Right, Louis Napoleon. He'd just come to power, needed to look strong, appeal to Catholic support back home.
Exactly. He saw this as a perfect opportunity to restore French influence, flex French muscle. He used what they called gunboat diplomacy. He sent a warship, the Charlemagne, steaming towards Constantinople.
Just to make a point about church keys.
Essentially, yes. And it worked. The Sultan, under this direct military pressure from France, confirmed the French and Catholic privileges at the holy sites.
Which must have absolutely infuriated Tsar Nicholas I.
Oh, completely. Nicholas saw himself as the God-appointed protector of all Orthodox Christians in the Ottoman Empire. There were millions of them, maybe 12 million. He saw Napoleon III's move, and the Sultan giving in, as a direct insult to him, to Russia, and to the Orthodox faith, a challenge to Russia's traditional role.
So Nicholas decides he needs to respond forcefully.
Massively forcefully.
Right.
He dispatched Prince Menshikov, known for being deliberately abrasive and arrogant, to Constantinople.
Not just to sort out the keys issue, presumably.
Not at all. Menshikov arrived with a list of demands that went way beyond the holy sites. He demanded a formal treaty that would basically give Russia the right to act as the official protector of all Orthodox subjects within the Ottoman Empire.
That sounds like giving Russia a permanent excuse to interfere in Ottoman affairs.
It was exactly that. It would have essentially turned the Ottoman Empire into a Russian protectorate, giving the Tsar veto power over huge swathes of internal Ottoman policy.
Did Nicholas really think the Sultan would agree to that? Or that the other powers would let him?
He seemed to believe he had the leverage. He thought Austria owed him for helping crush the Hungarian Revolution in 1848, and he apparently believed Britain might stay neutral, maybe even accept a deal where they'd get Egypt or Crete if the Ottoman Empire was carved up.
He completely misread the situation then. Misread Britain especially.
Utterly. Britain was now committed to preserving the Ottomans, not partitioning them, and Nicholas underestimated the influence of one particular figure in Constantinople.
Who was that?
The British ambassador, Stratford Canning, known as the Great Elchi, a really powerful, almost domineering personality who had huge sway over the Sultan.
So Canning advised the Sultan to resist.
He did more than advise. He basically stiffened the Sultan's spine, assured him of British and French support if he rejected Menshikov's most extreme demands, the protectorate stuff. The Ottoman government itself was divided, weak, but Canning provided that crucial resolve.
Yeah, and the Sultan rejected the Russian demands.
He rejected the Protectorate Treaty, yes, which sent Nicholas I into a fury. He reportedly raged about the infernal dictatorship of this Redcliffe, which was Canning's later title.
Okay, so diplomacy has failed spectacularly. Pride is wounded on all sides. What's the next step towards actual war?
the first physical act of aggression. In July 1853, Russian troops marched into and occupied the Danubian principalities Moldavia and Wallachia, modern-day Romania, roughly.
Still technically Ottoman territory, right? Though autonomous.
Exactly. Russia claimed they were doing it to pressure the Sultan into concessions, not necessarily an act of war yet. But the Ottomans saw it differently. Backed by Britain and France, they felt emboldened.
So they declared war.
They did in October 1853, and initially the fighting was just between the Ottomans and Russians along the Danube River. The Ottomans actually held their own surprisingly well at first, halting the Russian advance at Silistria.
But this wasn't the event that pulled Britain and France in directly.
No, the catalyst for that came a month later at sea, the Battle of Sinop, November 30th, 1853.
What happened at Sinop?
A Russian naval squadron found an Ottoman patrol fleet anchored in the harbor of Sinop on the Black Sea coast of Turkey. The Russians blockaded them and then systematically destroyed them.
A decisive Russian victory.
Crushing, utterly crushing for the Ottomans. 11 Ottoman warships sunk. But crucially, the Russians used new technology paysans, explosive naval shells.
Explosive shells.
Yeah.
Not just solid cannonballs.
Right. These shells exploded on impact, ripping through the wooden hulls of the Ottoman ships, starting huge fires, causing horrific damage and casualties. It was devastatingly effective.
A tactical triumph for Russia, but you can see how that would look back in London and Paris.
Exactly. Strategically, it crippled the Ottoman Navy in the Black Sea. But politically, it was an absolute disaster for Russia.
How so?
The British and French press got hold of the story, emphasizing the use of these near-explosive shells against wooden ships anchored in port. They didn't call it a battle. They branded it the Massacre of Sinop.
A massacre. That's powerful language.
Incredibly powerful. It ignited this wave of public outrage in Britain and France. War fever, really. Any chance of a diplomatic solution, any remaining caution in the governments, it was just swept away by this tide of fury and demands for retribution.
So Sinop basically made Western intervention inevitable?
Pretty much. Rational calculation went out the window. Britain and France issued an ultimatum to Russia. Withdraw from the principalities. Russia refused.
And so?
So in March 1854, Britain and France formally declared war on Russia.
Wow. And the original cause, the occupation of the principalities, was almost becoming a sideshow by then.
Almost irrelevant. The war had taken on a life of its own, fueled by naval power, new technology, media frenzy, and wounded national pride. It wasn't just about the Danube anymore. The Allies were preparing to take the fight directly to Russian soil. To Crimea.
Okay, so Britain and France are officially in the war. But didn't the original reason for the war, the occupation of the Danubian principalities, get resolved fairly quickly after that?
It did, ironically. Under diplomatic pressure, and with Austria threatening to join the Allies, Russia actually withdrew its troops from Moldavia and Wallachia in the summer of 1854. Austria then moved in to occupy them as a neutral peacekeeping force.
So technically, the war could have ended right there. The initial objective was met.
Logically, yes. But the Allies had mobilized this huge expeditionary force. They had whipped up public opinion. They couldn't just pack up and go home. They needed a victory. They needed to humble Russia, to destroy its naval power in the Black Sea.
So the focus shifted entirely to Crimea, and specifically to Sevastopol.
Exactly. Sevastopol was the home base of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Taking it would cripple Russian naval power in the region for decades. That became the new objective.
Tell us about the invasion itself. How did they get there?
In September 1854, this enormous Allied fleet, maybe nearly 400 ships carrying troops and supplies, landed at Kalamata Bay in western Crimea.
Did they achieve surprise?
Total surprise. The Russians were expecting an attack further east, maybe near Feodosia. They were caught off guard. The Allies then started marching south towards Sevastopol.
And the first big battle happened fairly quickly.
Yes, on September 20th at the Alma River, the Allies encountered the main Russian field army, which had dug in on the heights overlooking the river.
How did that go?
It was a bloody frontal assault by the Allies. They managed to push the Russians off the heights, a clear victory, but costly. The Russians lost maybe 6,000 men.
A victory, but then came a crucial mistake, didn't it?
A massive strategic blunder. The Allied commanders, Lord Raglan for the British and Marshal St. Arnaud for the French, failed to pursue the retreating Russians immediately.
Why not? They had momentum.
They were cautious, they worried about their flanks, about Russian reserves. They also believed the northern defenses of Sevastopol itself were too strong to attack directly. So instead of chasing the defeated army, they decided to march around Sevastopol to the south.
To attack from a different direction and set up supply lines.
Exactly. They wanted to establish secure bases on the coast south of the city, the British at Balaclava, the French at Kamish, and then begin a formal siege from there.
But that delay, it gave the Russians time, didn't it?
Crucial time. While the Allies were making their flank march, the Russian commanders inside Sevastopol, particularly Admiral Kornilov and the engineer Todolbin, worked frantically.
What did they do?
First, Kornilov made the painful decision to sink several warships of the Black Sea Fleet across the entrance to Sevastopol harbor. This blocked it off, preventing the Allied navies from sailing right in.
A major sacrifice.
Huge. Then, Todolbin mobilized literally everyone in the city, soldiers, sailors, civilians, to build earthwork fortifications, trenches, redoubts, gun batteries, all facing south, where they now expected the Allied attack.
So when the Allies finally got into position in the south, they weren't facing an open city.
Not at all. They were facing a rapidly strengthening fortress. The chance for a quick capture was gone. The Allies settled in, established their bases, and the long, grinding 11-month siege of Sevastopol began.
And it wasn't long before the Russians tried to break that siege, leading to one of the most famous days of the war, Balaclava.
October 25th, 1854. The Russians launched a major attack aimed at the British base at Balaclava, drilling to cut their supply lines. It led to, well, several incredibly famous and infamous actions.
Let's start with the success story first, the Thin Red Line.
Right. During the Russian advance, a large force of Russian cavalry charged towards the British supply depot, which was defended by the 93rd Highlanders. Their commander, Sir Colin Campbell, did something unconventional.
Instead of forming a square, which was the standard way infantry met cavalry.
Exactly. He didn't have time, or perhaps he had immense faith in his men and their weapons. He drew them up in a line, just 2 ranks deep. A thin red line, as the war correspondent William Howard Russell later wrote.
This sounds incredibly risky. Just 2 lines of men against charging horses.
It was. But the key was their weapon. The mini rifle.
Ah, the new rifle technology. Much better range and accuracy than the old muskets.
Far better. Effective range, maybe 400 yards, compared to maybe 100 for a smoothbore musket. The Highlanders opened fire with devastating effect. They delivered several volleys, breaking the Russian cavalry charge before it even reached their line. Russell immortalized it as that thin red streak tipped with steel.
An amazing display of discipline and firepower. But then, later that same day, came the disaster, the charge of the Light Brigade.
Yes, one of the most famous and tragic blunders in military history. It stemmed from confusion and poorly communicated orders.
What was supposed to happen?
The Russians had captured some British naval guns on the heights overlooking one of the valleys, the North Valley. They were starting to haul them away. Lord Raglan, the British commander, watching from a high vantage point, saw this and wanted the light cavalry to intervene quickly to stop them.
Okay, makes sense. So he sent an order.
He did. But the order was hastily written, ambiguous. It said to advance rapidly and prevent the enemy carrying away the guns. It was given to Captain Nolan to deliver to the cavalry commander, Lord Lucan, down in the valley.
And Lucan couldn't see the same guns Raglan could see.
Exactly. From the valley floor, the only guns clearly visible were a formidable battery of Russian artillery positioned at the far end of the valley, not the ones on the heights to the side. Lucan questioned the order. Nolan, who was known for his impetuous nature, apparently gestured vaguely not towards the heights but down the main valley towards the Russian battery.
Oh, no.
Lucan then relayed the order to Lord Cardigan, commander of the Light Brigade. Cardigan protested, pointing out the valley was lined with Russian riflemen and artillery on both sides, plus the battery at the end. But Lucan insisted it was Raglan's order.
So they charged, straight down the valley.
They did. About 700 men charged directly into a deadly crossfire from 3 sides. It was absolute carnage. Nolan, ironically, was one of the first killed. They reached the Russian guns at the end, caused some disruption, but suffered horrific casualties, about 278 men killed, wounded, or captured in just a few minutes.
Utterly devastating. Did it achieve anything strategically?
Very little. Some sources argue the sheer, almost suicidal bravery of the charge unnerved the Russian cavalry nearby, causing them to retreat, but that's debatable. Mostly, it was a tragic waste.
So Balaclava gave us heroism and disaster side by side. What happened next in the campaign?
A few weeks later, in early November 1854, the Russians launched another major assault, this time directly against the Allied siege lines on the Increment Heights. It was a brutal, confused, close-quarters battle fought in thick fog.
The soldiers' battle, they called it.
Yes, because command and control broke down completely in the fog. It was just small groups of soldiers fighting desperately on their own initiative. The Allies held on, just barely, inflicting heavy losses on the Russians, but it was another bloody, inconclusive fight. Inkerman basically confirmed that this was going to be a long, drawn-out siege.
And then winter arrived. And winter in Crimea, well, it became the biggest killer, didn't it?
Far bigger than the Russians. The winter of 1854-55 was exceptionally harsh, and the Allied logistical system just collapsed.
That went wrong.
Everything. It started with a massive storm, the Great Storm, or Balaclava Storm, on November 14th, 1854. It wrecked the harbor at Balaclava and sank around 30 Allied transport ships.
Carrying vital supplies.
Critically vital supplies. One ship, the HMS Prince, went down carrying almost the entire shipment of winter clothing for the British Army. Boots, greatcoats, tents, medical supplies, food, all lost to the sea.
A catastrophe.
An absolute catastrophe, and things only got worse. The single road linking the port at Balaclava up to the siege lines on the plateau turned into an impassable sea of mud, 6 miles of freezing, boot-sucking mud.
So they couldn't get supplies to the troops?
Barely. Men were starving, freezing, living in ragged tents or holes in the ground. They were burning roots, dismantling defensive structures just for firewood. Disease ran rampant: cholera, dysentery, typhus, scurvy. More men were dying of disease by far than from enemy action.
It sounds like hell on earth. Were there any attempts to fix the supply problem?
Belatedly, yes. The public outcry back in Britain, fueled by Russell's reports in the Times, forced the government to act. They commissioned civilian contractors to build a railway from Balaclava up to the camps.
A railway in the middle of a war zone.
Yes, the Grand Crimean Central Railway. But it took time. The materials didn't arrive until January 1855, and it wasn't fully operational until March. Same with the electric telegraph. They laid a cable across the Black Sea for faster communication, but again, delays meant it wasn't working properly until the spring.
So the worst of the suffering happened before these technological fixes came online.
Absolutely. The winter months were the nadir. Just horrific suffering and death from cold, hunger, and disease. And the strain wasn't just on the Allies.
How were things on the Russian side, inside Sevastopol?
Conditions were also terrible, though perhaps slightly better supplied initially. But the overall strain of the war, the defeats, the immense cost in lives and money, it took its toll on the man who started it all.
Tsar Nicholas I.
Yes. He was reportedly devastated by the news from Crimea, by the failure of his army, by the financial crisis the war was causing. He caught pneumonia, possibly worsened by his despair, and died in March 1855, apparently filled with remorse.
Wow. The Tsar himself became a casualty of the war he launched. He was succeeded by his son, Alexander II,
who inherited a disastrous war and a nation clearly in need of fundamental change. But amid all this military incompetence and suffering, something truly revolutionary was happening in terms of care for the wounded.
Florence Nightingale.
Florence Nightingale. Her name is synonymous with the Crimean War, and for good reason. She arrived at the huge, chaotic British hospital barracks at Scutari across the Bosphorus from Constantinople in November 1854.
What did she find there?
Appalling conditions. Filth, overcrowding, vermin, overflowing sewers, almost no basic sanitation or nursing care. The death rate was astronomical, mostly from infections contracted after soldiers arrived at the hospital.
Not directly from their battle wounds.
No. She realized the primary killer was disease, spread by the horrific lack of hygiene. So she and her team of nurses instituted revolutionary changes.
Like what?
Basic things we take for granted now. Scrubbing the wards clean, ensuring clean bedding and bandages, proper ventilation, adequate food, organizing supplies efficiently. She was a brilliant administrator as much as a nurse.
And it worked.
Dramatically. The sources show the mortality rate at Scutari plummeted from over 40% when she arrived down to about 2% within 6 months. She proved definitively the link between sanitation and survival in hospitals. It laid the foundation for modern nursing.
An incredible legacy. And she wasn't the only one trying to help, was she?
No, indeed. We should definitely mention Mary Seacole, a Jamaican woman, a businesswoman and healer who funded her own trip to Crimea after being rejected by the official nursing groups.
What did she do?
She set up something called the British Hotel near Balaclava, providing food, supplies, and medical care, often right on the battlefields, to soldiers of all ranks. A remarkable, determined figure.
And on the Russian side, any medical pioneers?
Yes, Nikolai Pirogov, a brilliant Russian surgeon who made huge advances in field surgery during the siege. He introduced the system of triage, sorting casualties by the severity of their injuries, which is still fundamental today. He also pioneered the use of plaster casts to immobilize broken bones and used anesthesia extensively in field hospitals, years ahead of his time in many ways.
It's this strange contrast, isn't it? Monumental logistical failure alongside individual brilliance and innovation.
It really defines the war. And the scale of it wasn't just limited to Crimea either. People sometimes forget that.
Right, you mentioned earlier it was almost like a preview of a world war. Where else was fighting happening?
There were significant naval campaigns in the Baltic Sea. The British and French fleets blockaded the Russian coast, bombarded fortresses like Bomersund and the Åland Islands. This forced Russia to keep large numbers of troops garrisoned near St. Petersburg, just in case.
Tied up resources they could have used in Crimea.
Exactly. There were also minor actions in the White Sea, up north, and even way out in the Pacific. The Allies actually attacked the Russian port of Petropavlovsk on the Kamchatka Peninsula.
Really? Why there?
Trying to disrupt Russian naval presence globally. The attack actually failed, but it shows the surprisingly wide geographic scope of the conflict.
And then there's the involvement of Sardinia-Piedmont. They didn't seem to have any direct stake in the Ottoman Empire or the Black Sea. Why did they send troops?
That was pure political calculation by their prime minister, Cavour. He wanted Sardinia-Piedmont, the nucleus of a future unified Italy, to have a seat at the top table of European diplomacy.
So sending troops was their ticket to the peace conference.
Precisely. They sent about 21,000 men. They didn't see a huge amount of action, though they fought well at the Battle of the Chernaya River later in the siege. But their participation earned Cavour that coveted place at the Paris Peace Congress, where he could raise the Italian question with the great powers, especially Austria. It was a shrewd diplomatic gamble.
Okay, so back to Sevastopol. The siege grinds on through 1855. What became the key objective for the Allies to finally break the city?
It became clear that the key to the whole southern defense line was a large Russian fortification called the Malakoff Redoubt, or Malakoff Hill.
Why was that so important?
It dominated the eastern side of the city and the inner harbor. Both sides recognized that whoever held the Malakoff essentially held Sevastopol. Admiral Nakhimov, the Russian commander before he was killed, called it the Master Key.
So the fighting focused there.
Intensely. Through the spring and summer of 1855, it was relentless artillery duels, trench warfare, bloody assaults and counter-assaults on the Malakoff and nearby fortifications like the Redan, which the British repeatedly failed to capture. Both sides suffered terrible losses.
Including commanders.
Yes, leadership losses were heavy. We mentioned Nakhimov died. The British commander, Lord Raglan, who had endured so much criticism, died of dysentery in June 1855. His French counterpart, Canrobert, resigned earlier. New commanders took over, perhaps bringing fresh impetus.
Leading up to the final push.
Exactly. After months of stalemate and mining and countermining under the fortifications, the Allies prepared for one massive final assault. They unleashed a colossal artillery bombardment, the sixth major one of the siege for several days.
And then the attack.
On September 8th, 1855, the French forces under General McMahon launched a determined assault on the Malakoff. This time, they succeeded. They stormed the fort, captured it, and famously McMahon declared, "Je suis, je reste, here I am, here I stay."
The Russians couldn't retake it.
They launched desperate counterattacks, but the French held firm. With the Malakoff loss, the entire Russian defensive line became untenable. That night, the Russians decided to abandon the southern side of Sevastopol.
How did they manage that?
Under the cover of darkness, they retreated across a pontoon bridge to the north side of the harbor, blowing up their remaining forts and powder magazines, sinking the last of their warships. The Allies entered the ruined, burning city on September 9th, 1855.
After 337 days.
337 days of brutal siege. The cost was immense on all sides. Hundreds of thousands dead, mostly from disease. Sevastopol was taken, the Black Sea Fleet destroyed.
But the war had already shown that political will, or maybe just inertia and pride, could keep the fighting going long after the original aims were gone.
That's the horrifying truth of it. The fall of Sevastopol was decisive militarily, but the war had already consumed so much. So the big question hanging in the air was, could the exhausted powers actually forge a lasting peace from this? Or had the sheer scale of the sacrifice just guaranteed more instability down the road?
Sevastopol has fallen, the human cost is staggering, the fighting kind of peters out after that, right? How did they get to the peace table?
Yes, major combat operations largely ceased after Sevastopol fell, though there were still some actions, like the capture of the Russian fortress of Kars in the Caucasus by the Ottomans, ironically, after Sevastopol. But everyone was exhausted, especially France.
Well, by France in particular.
They had suffered the heaviest casualties among the Allies. Napoleon III had achieved his main goal, restoring French prestige, breaking the old alliances that had constrained France since Napoleon I. He was eager for a diplomatic triumph to cap it off, so he pushed hard for peace negotiations in Paris.
So France drove the peace process.
Largely, yes. And because Napoleon III wasn't looking to utterly crush Russia, he actually saw a potential future alignment with them. He didn't support the really harsh terms that some in Britain wanted. This made reaching an agreement somewhat easier. The Treaty of Paris was signed on March 30th, 1856.
Okay, what were the main points of the treaty? What did Russia lose and what did the Allies gain?
Russia had to give back Kars to the Ottomans. They also had to cede a small strip of territory, southern Bessarabia, at the mouth of the Danube, to Moldavia.
Not huge territorial losses then.
No, not compared to the scale of the war. The Allies, in return, restored Sevastopol and the other captured Crimean territories to Russia, though Sevastopol was basically rubble. The real sting for Russia, the core humiliation, was the demilitarization of the Black Sea.
Those Black Sea clauses you mentioned. What exactly did they forbid?
They prohibited both Russia and the Ottoman Empire from maintaining naval arsenals or fortifications on the Black Sea coast. And crucially, it limited the number and size of warships they could keep there to just small patrol vessels.
So it effectively destroyed Russian naval power in what they saw as their own backyard.
Completely neutralized it. For a naval power like Russia with ambitions in the Mediterranean, this was a major strategic blow, a constant source of resentment.
How enforceable was that in the long run, though? Seems tricky.
It really depended on the continued unity and willingness of Britain and France to enforce it. As we'll see, that unity didn't last forever.
What else did the treaty do? Did it help the Ottoman Empire?
Well, on paper, yes. The Ottoman Empire was formally admitted into the Concert of Europe, the club of great powers. All the signatories pledged to respect its independence and territorial integrity.
A paper guarantee, perhaps.
Largely. It didn't stop future Russian encroachment, but it was a symbolic recognition. Also, the Danubian principalities, Moldavia and Wallachia, were placed under the joint guarantee of the powers, effectively making them autonomous vassal states, no longer just under Russian or Ottoman domination. This paved the way for their eventual unification as Romania.
Okay, so that's the treaty. But the impact of the war, especially on Russia, went far deeper than these clauses, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. For Russia, the defeat was a profound national shock. A crisis of identity, almost.
How so? What did the war expose?
It brutally exposed just how backward Russia was compared to the industrializing powers of Western Europe, militarily, technologically, administratively.
In what ways specifically?
Well, the lack of railways was crippling. Troops and supplies had to march or be carted thousands of miles, taking months. Communications were terrible. Orders took weeks to reach the front. Corruption was endemic in the supply system. Their weaponry was often inferior. And maybe most fundamentally, the war showed that an army based on illiterate, untrained serfs, led by an often arrogant but incompetent aristocracy, simply couldn't compete with the armies of nations with free, educated populations and industrial backing.
That's a huge realization, that the very social structure of Russia was a military liability.
Precisely. And Tsar Alexander II, who took over mid-war, he understood this. He and many reform-minded officials realized that Russia had to modernize, fundamentally, or risk falling permanently behind, becoming vulnerable to future defeats.
So the Crimean War defeat was the direct trigger for major reforms in Russia.
Absolutely, the catalyst. It created the political will, the sense of urgency that hadn't existed before. This led directly to the period known as the Great Reforms.
The most famous being the end of serfdom.
Yes, the Emancipation Reform of 1861 freed over 20 million serfs. This wasn't just about social justice, though that was part of the rhetoric. It was also about creating a mobile labor force for industry, and crucially, a pool of free men who could be properly trained and motivated as modern soldiers.
Acknowledging that free soldiers had beaten their serf army.
Exactly. They also reformed the justice system, local government, censorship, and military service itself, introducing universal conscription for all classes, at least in theory. It was a top-down revolution driven by the shock of defeat.
So the war forced Russia onto a path of modernization, albeit a difficult one. What about the rest of Europe? How did the war reshuffle the deck there?
It completely shattered the old alliance system, the Concert of Europe, that had more or less kept the peace among the great powers since the Napoleonic Wars ended in 1815.
How did it do that?
Primarily by destroying the relationship between Russia and Austria. They had been the conservative bedrock of the concert, the core of the Holy Alliance.
But Austria didn't even fight Russia.
No, but their diplomatic maneuvering backfired spectacularly. They tried to play both sides. They occupied the Danubian principalities after Russia withdrew, which pleased the Allies, but they did it under the threat of joining the war against Russia if they didn't withdraw.
So they alienated Russia, their longtime ally.
Completely. Russia felt betrayed. Austria gained nothing tangible from the war, but emerged diplomatically isolated. They had angered Russia, weren't trusted by Britain and France, and were now vulnerable.
And that isolation had consequences.
Huge consequences. Just 3 years later, in 1859, France and Sardinia-Piedmont attacked Austria, knowing Russia wouldn't lift a finger to help them. Austria was defeated and lost Lombardy, paving the way for Italian unification.
Wow.
Then, 7 years after that, in 1866, Bismarck's Prussia provoked a war with Austria. Again, Austria was isolated and was crushed by the Prussian military machine at the Battle of Sadowa. This ended Austrian influence in Germany, clearing the path for German unification under Prussia.
So Austria's diplomatic blunder during the Crimean War indirectly led to the creation of both modern Italy and modern Germany.
You can draw a direct line. The war destroyed the old conservative alliance structure and created the vacuum that allowed these nationalist movements, led by Cavour and Bismarck, to succeed.
Incredible ripple effects. What about those Black Sea clauses? Did they last?
Only as long as the power dynamic that created them held. That dynamic shifted dramatically in 1870-71 with the Franco-Prussian War.
France was defeated by Prussia.
Exactly. France, the main enforcer of the Treaty of Paris on the continent, was suddenly weak and preoccupied. Russia saw its chance. With diplomatic support from Bismarck, who was happy to see the 1856 treaty weakened to further isolate France, Russia simply declared in 1871 that it no longer considered itself bound by the Black Sea clauses.
Just unilaterally renounced them, and the other powers couldn't stop it.
Britain protested, but without French backing, there was little they could do short of another war, which nobody wanted. So Russia immediately began rebuilding its Black Sea fleet and fortifications. The centerpiece of the Treaty of Paris lasted just 15 years.
Any other long-term ripples? You hear about the sale of Alaska sometimes in this context.
Yes, there's a direct link. After the war, Russia looked at its vast, remote Alaskan territory. They realized how vulnerable it was. During the war, British naval power was dominant. Russia feared that in any future conflict, Britain could easily just sail over from Canada and seize Alaska.
So they decided it was better to sell it.
Better to get some money for it from a friendly power, the United States, than risk losing it for nothing in the next war. So Alexander II sold Alaska to the U.S. in 1867, partly driven by the strategic lessons learned in Crimea.
It's fascinating how this one conflict echoed outwards. But maybe the most chilling legacy is how it previewed modern warfare.
That's perhaps its most significant and darkest legacy. German historians called it the Vorbote der modernen Kriegsführung, the forerunner or harbinger of modern warfare.
In what ways?
It was this toxic combination. On the one hand, you had Napoleonic-era logistics and medical care leading to those horrific deaths from disease and neglect. But on the other hand, you had the first widespread tactical use of technologies that would define future wars.
Like the explosive naval shells at Sinop.
Exactly. Those instantly made wooden warships obsolete. Then, late in the war, the French used the first operational ironclad warships floating batteries to bombard Russian forts at Kinburn. The age of the ironclad navy had begun.
What else?
The mini rifle, providing infantry with accurate firepower at much longer ranges, changing battlefield tactics. The extensive use of trenches and earthwork fortifications at Sevastopol, previewing World War I.
And the technology off the battlefield. The railway, the telegraph.
Crucial. The Grand Crimean Central Railway showed the potential of railways to supply armies in the field, even if it was implemented too late to save thousands. And the electric telegraph. That was revolutionary for how war was reported.
Bringing news back home much faster.
Almost in real time compared to before. William Howard Russell's dispatches for the Times could reach London in days, not weeks or months. He became the first real celebrity war correspondent.
And his reporting had a direct impact.
A massive impact. His vivid, often critical accounts of the army's mismanagement, the suffering of the soldiers, the incompetence of the leadership, it fueled public outrage back in Britain. It directly led to the fall of the government under Lord Aberdeen.
So the first war fought under the glare of near-instant media coverage.
And public opinion shaping policy, even military strategy, in a way it never had before. Plus, you had photography.
Roger Fenton.
Yes, Roger Fenton took hundreds of photographs in Crimea. Because of the cumbersome technology then, he couldn't capture action, battle scenes. His photos are mostly portraits, landscapes, camp scenes. But they were still incredibly powerful. They brought the visual reality, the faces, the uniforms, the bleak landscape of a distant war home to the public for the first time. It made it real in a new way.
So putting it all together, this war was a messy, brutal transition point. Old ways of fighting and managing armies colliding disastrously with the new realities of industrial technology and mass communication.
Precisely. It was a showcase of incompetence, yes, but also a glimpse into the future of industrialized conflict. It solved very little definitively about the Eastern question that would rumble on for decades, but it fundamentally changed how Europe saw war, how it understood power, and it fatally weakened the old diplomatic system that had kept a lid on things for 40 years. A truly pivotal and tragic conflict. #outro.
So we've traced the path from, believe it or not, a dispute over church keys in Bethlehem, through the horrors of the Alma and Inkerman, the logistical nightmare of that first Crimean winter, the iconic tragedy of Balaclava, the life-saving work of Nightingale and others, and finally the fall of Sevastopol after nearly a year of siege. A war born out of fear, maybe paranoia, certainly miscalculation and national pride. A war that achieved few of its stated aims, but cost, maybe 500,000 lives or more? Mostly Russian, mostly from disease.
The estimates are staggering, yes. Somewhere possibly over 500,000 Russian deaths alone, military and civilian. Allied losses were also huge, maybe 250,000 combined. And for what? The Eastern question wasn't solved. The Black Sea clauses were temporary.
So if we're looking for the real takeaway, the final provocative thought, what should we leave our listeners mulling over?
I think it's this. The Crimean War didn't just break a period of peace. It actively created the conditions for future conflict by fundamentally destabilizing the European power structure. Humiliating Russia made them resentful and revisionist. Isolating Austria left a power vacuum in Central Europe that invited conflict and enabled unification wars.
It destroyed trust between the great powers.
Completely. The old concert of Europe, based on shared conservative principles and mutual reliance, was dead. What replaced it was a much more cynical, opportunistic system of shifting alliances and nationalist rivalries. So you could argue the Crimean War didn't just end an era of peace. It planted the specific seeds, the mistrust, the resentments, the altered power balance that would eventually germinate over the next few decades into the series of crises that culminated, ultimately, in 1914.
Wow.
So the question it leaves you with is, what does this incredibly costly, seemingly contained 19th century war tell us about the long, dangerous afterlife of conflicts built on mutual fear and the fragility of international systems designed to manage them?
A chilling thought and a crucial perspective. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today into the Crimean War, Europe's hidden catastrophe. We hope this exploration has given you plenty to think about and perhaps explore further on your own.